Thanks, everybody, and thanks for all participants of the conference. And I have to follow, so many people have already done that, to congratulate Isabella and the Economic Institute for putting together this excellent conference. And when I came here, that many people told me that Brazil is a kind of a late starter in China studies. So Brazil is trying to catch up. And my response is that latecomer always has a lot of advantage. That just like in development, late development countries is always do things more right than early developers. And I think after 2 days of discussion, and it is proven that I'm right, that I'm very fascinated by the fact that the discussion about China is so up to date, and the perspective is so up to date here. In many aspects, it's even much more up to date than what I can see with my colleagues in the U.S. and things. Because U.S. has a long tradition of China study, but there's a lot of established figures that have very stubborn paradigm. They are making an argument, and after the argument is outdated, they refuse to update it, and so we are still debating some kind of 5 years ago kind of situation. For example, that the President Trump right now is still accusing China of manipulating the currency to push it to a kind of a low level to improve its export competitiveness. It was an argument like 6 years old, that 6 years ago people are saying that China is pushing down the currency to improve export competitiveness, but everybody knows that, and everybody in this room knows that, and many of the presenters point out that now China has a capital outflow problem, and that is a kind of uncontrollable depreciation of the currency. So the government intervention, yes, the Central Bank of China has been intervening to artificially shape the currency value of the renminbi, but now the policy is not to push down the currency, but to pop it up. So that to prevent a kind of a vicious circle of uncontrollable capital outflow and collapse of the currency. So, but the president is still making this like 6 years old outdated argument. And also in academia, there are many people still celebrating the global rise of renminbi as a kind of alternative to the U.S. dollar, as many of our presenters today and yesterday, including myself, and point out, actually China has already secretly, silently given up the internationalization of the yuan project, at least for now, because now the first priority is to stem the capital outflow, protect the yuan value through some very draconian capital control policy. Now some foreign investors are campaigning that they cannot ship their profit out to their home countries because of this currency. So I am very impressed that the discussion here is much more up to date and catching up with reality, much more than in what I see in many quarters in Europe and in the U.S. And here I just want to make a few quick references to some of the issues that come up but didn't have time to be fully elaborated or debated. One is yesterday there's some discussion about socialism and capitalism. And actually that is whether the Chinese economy, how much it is capitalist, how much is it socialist. And many people like myself a few months before think that it is a non-issue because definitely it is fully capitalist. But actually, this question is more debatable than we imagine. I realized it when the Chinese translator of my book, when I referred to capitalism in China, Chinese capitalism in the book, when in the Chinese edition, that many of these terms is translated, when translated into Chinese, they don't translate it into Chinese capitalism or capitalism in China. They use the term socialist market economy with Chinese characteristics. So politically, it seems that the parties still think that it is not politically correct to say that there is a capitalism in China. I think it's not self-deception. There's some realism in it because, to be sure, in terms of the driving force of the economy, capitalism is in charge. The process of capital accumulation, the profit motivation is very much in charge, even for state enterprise. Like 20, 30 years ago when you ride a bus in Beijing, you see there is a bus driver, and there is a women selling a ticket, and there's another woman at the back tracking the ticket. So there are 3 people hired in the bus. So it's very non-capitalistic because it's very inefficient. But from a socialist point of view, it is creation of full employment. Now you don't see that they have this kind of sensor card that's only the driver, and then you use a card and then deduct the value from the card, and only one. So it lay off 2 people, and then only one is left. And it is very capitalistic, very efficient. But so it is in this sense that China has moved from a socialism to capitalism. Profitability override full employment and other social benefits. And also in the state enterprise reform, in the old days, I visit some of the state enterprise in which some of my family, uncle, aunt work in. They get when they want to cut hair, they have an in-house free hairdresser and beauty parlor, and they have a free healthcare, free childcare, and then when they go to doctor in the work unit, they have their own medical clinic, and then so everything is for free. So it is very socialist. But from a capitalist point of view, it is not profitable because it doesn't go into profit. This is a wasteful use of money. So in this sense, China has moved from socialism to capitalism. But on the other hand, there's one crucial aspect of the economy which is still not fully capitalist. That is the property relation. That the private property is still not absolute in China. That if you buy a piece of land, if you buy an apartment, you don't own the property right of the land, of the apartment, of the property. You only purchase a limited in terms of period of the right of use of the piece of land. Usually 20 years, 30 years. It is expected to be renewable, but the ultimate owner of the piece of property is still by the government, by the state. So the state can take it back for other purpose anytime. And so right now, there's a big debate within Chinese intellectual circles between right and left. And of course, there's many free market economics will think that it is bad. You don't have an absolute clear definition of property ownership. And it is many people criticize this state ownership of all property is still the origins of many land appropriation with little compensation and all that. But some other people will think that it is a good thing because without this kind of absolute private property, it gives the state still a potential to take use of or reappropriate this property for public goods. Though the state might not be doing it now, but it enables the state to have this potential to enact some kind of a social program. And I think it is a few years ago, many people are talking about the Chongqing models, and it has something to do with this kind of a state action in redistribution and social goods. So in this aspect, that China is still socialist in terms of property ownership. So in China is an interesting time in the sense that in the years to come, we will probably see a lot of debate still going on this area, whether to establish an absolute private property of ownership of property. So it is one thing. The other thing is I want to address is that actually I'm glad that Chi mentioned about the origins of the new normal, that I totally agree with him in a kind of a Marxian language. But there's a graph that I wanted to show yesterday, but I didn't have time to show that. Please go on. A blue one. When you see some blue color, then go on. This one, yes. So basically, this is the conference board of the U.S. It is a business consultancy think tank organization, 100 years old. They have been publishing this total productivity data of different major economies around the world, and it is quite authoritative. So not everybody will totally agree, but it creates a kind of a heuristic framework for us to analyze the pattern of China growth. Basically, it is just reiterate what Chi said in a more orthodox economic language, that Chi is talking about organic composition of capital, C plus V plus S, and all this Marxian language. But this is basically saying about the same thing, that There's a literature on total labor, total productivity, total factor productivity. That is capital productivity plus labor productivity. And in the high-speed growth period of Chinese economy, you see that the purple bar is large. That is a lot of this high-speed growth of China has been driven by productivity gain, labor productivity and capital productivity. But somehow after 2008, that part become smaller and smaller. And now the latest data, which is 2015, is negative. So there's a negative growth in total factor productivity. And now the growth has slowed down. And the remaining growth rate is actually driven by contribution of capital intensity, meaning that the growth is driven by just burning more coal and throwing more stuff, throwing more input into the furnace. So it is a very extensive Soviet Union type growth. As Paul Krugman pointed out, this kind of extensive growth is very typical of a Soviet planning model. You don't increase productivity, you just throw more stuff into the economic process to generate more growth. So what is happening is that the productivity growth in the past has been mostly driven by China's absorption of foreign capital, and also putting more labor, the transfer of labor from the low productivity sector of agriculture and thing into the high productivity sector, that is foreign capital dominated export processing, for example. But there's a limit that how long that China can do it. Now it seems that this FDI-driven productivity growth and labor transfer productivity growth has been kind of hitting the bottleneck. So the future of China economy is there's two possibilities that Xi talked about: the internal reform, redistribution reform, or what Xi Jinping said, the supply side reform, and whatever you name it. So it is internal reform. So it is one possibility. The second, but there is also a second possibility that one of the speakers yesterday mentioned Lenin theory of imperialism. That by imperialism, I don't have any value judgment in it. That is just the logic of capital. That it is the situation in early 20th century core economies that they run into some internal contradictions of foreign profit. And one way to solve the internal contradiction is to reform, internal revolution, internal reform. But more often than not, that this country would not seek this internal reform path, but seek external expansion. That is first economic expansion. You export capital to place where productivity is lower, so that you can have a windfall of rising productivity by exporting your relatively high productivity capital goods to these low productivity places. So it is economic process. It's lateral for the capitalists to do that, rather than making serious compromise to the working class domestically. Some folks will think that it is better to just go out to invest in other places with high profit rate. As I mentioned yesterday, that this is the economic logic of capital export, and China has been doing it through foreign direct investment in other countries, and also through these conditional loans that China banking institution lend money to developing countries with the condition that this country would take the loan to hire Chinese company to build road, to build stadium, to build schools and all kind of different infrastructures or capital utility facilities. So it is the economic logic. There's nothing to dispute and in terms of morality. But also it is very lateral that when you economically go out, that you need to protect the circuit of accumulation overseas, then you develop a tendency to try to influence foreign politics to protect your foreign investment. It is very lateral. So it led to the Lenin's thesis about this kind of imperialism as the highest stage of capitalism. So it is why China has been exporting capital developing world, and Brazil has been also exporting capital to developing world, and India as well. So it is these new emerging new powers, and some people use some moral language to say that it is a sub-imperialism or neo-imperialism or whatever. But to my view, it is not necessarily bad, because The only bad thing is that you are bullied by one imperialist power. When several imperial power is trying to come to you, if you have a good government, if you have a smart politician, and you can pay one against the other and get a good deal. And of course, there's a lot of different kind of conditions. But in terms of China future development, now it is picking this kind of outward investment route and some other some kind of global governance institution is going out of it. One is, of course, the BRICS that we talk about that this new emerging power and new capital exporter are kind of coalescing together to form a kind of a new block of power. And other is, of course, that the AIIB that is really China-dominated Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank that is focused on the Silk Road and the One Belt One Road initiative. So it is the initiative, which is still very incipient, that China is doing to regenerate economic vitality through capital export. But now China is going into this kind of very crucial stage of learning and trying to develop its capability to project its power overseas, to protect its the circuit of capital accumulation overseas, and whether this will lead to a challenge to the existing power bloc that is dominated by U.S. hegemony, to as many of my left-wing friends will expect, that is, it will lead to a more egalitarian global governing situation to replace the U.S. hegemony, or it will lead to a kind of inter-imperial rivalry, landing style that lead to a new conflicts and so on and so forth. It's remain to be seen, and there's some interesting thing is going on. But I'm wrapping up that. But the last point I want to raise is that people look at the South China Sea and look at all these kind of place to predict that U.S. and China might go to conflict over this kind of thing. But I'm always optimistic on that, and I am always optimistic that U.S. and China will find some way economically to make a deal and then to contain this kind of conflict carefully. What I worry about is actually that is not popping up yet, but I think it can pop up easily, is Central Asia, that the China One Belt One Road initiative to build high-speed rail and all this investment in Central Asia. Right now, Russia was sanctioned by Europe and U.S., so it has no other choice but to be cordial to this Chinese initiative in Central Asia. But I sense that a lot of tension and suspicion on the Russian part is there. That actually I was in Moscow in January for the meeting section with about One Belt One Road, and the former World Bank Vice President and Chief Economist Justin Lin was there, and he's very upbeat about the One Belt One Road. I'm cautiously optimistic, but there's a number of former presidents and former central banker of Central Asian state, Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan, and also Russian economic officials. And I can sense that they are very, very suspicious of the whole thing, and particularly the Russian, they are thinking that this Central Asia, former Soviet Republic, is my backyard. What are you doing here? And it is not profitable. So are you going to come here just to challenge us, Russian? And so I can see that this is a kind of a real tension. And Russia already starting to plan a Siberian high-speed rail to try to compete with the One Belt One Road. And I can imagine that if the Western sanction on Russia loosen up, and then Russia will go back to Central Asia to try to compete with China. And after all, China's last war was with Vietnam, which is a proxy of Russia at that time, and also with Soviet Union in the 60s over the border. So in terms of inter-imperial rivalry or all this kind of China capital export, if it lead to some kind of conflict, it might be about Russia and China more than about U.S. and China. So when we talk about BRICS, and also India is very suspicious of China as well. So the India, Russia, and China is not as friendly as it appears to be. So it is what I worry about. And Brazil is in a good position because Brazil is not particularly never had conflict with any of this country. But India, Russia, and China is because they're close geographically, so they are in a more kind of hidden tension in there. So let me wrap up here, and thanks a lot.